Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Moving ahead on an interesting day's discussions on the Indian Telecom last mile, as its caption captures it so well, so near yet so far. Now we need to look at what the innovations, service delivery and impacts are likely to bring in. Many may be putting on their thinking caps to make it a truly ideas factory, as they call it. And on this panel today, we have a distinguished panel. Ms. Anu Madgavkar, representing McKinsey Global Institute, who brings a lot of perspective from a major organization which researches the whole activities that keep going across the world and is able to pick what are the best elements available on innovations everywhere and would be able to give us an insight into what to look for in the Indian context. We also have Mr. Anupam Khanna, Chief Economist and DG of NASSCOM, and his experience in the World Bank at a macro level gives him an insight into how economies have shaped over the several decades, or at least in the last 2 decades with the onset of IT and broadband, and give us an idea and the correlation between broadband penetration and its impact on socioeconomic indicators. We also have Mr. Rajat Kathuria, the Director and Chief Executive of ICRIER, the institution which is hosting this particular conference today, and his wide experience having worked with the TRAI and having a deep understanding of the telecom sector brings within the panel a holistic approach of an international firm, a World Bank experience, an academic well steeped into the Indian telecom sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to an interesting evening today and do hope that you could also pick their brains to find out what is in it there for the innovation on service delivery and the impact that it could be having. I'll start with requesting Ms. Anu Madgavkar to make a brief presentation. You have a presentation, and then move ahead with it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Ravi Shankar. So I have the privilege of speaking first in this session, and I think there's going to be a lot of very interesting insights coming after me. I'll keep it short, but really focused on what I like to think is the hope and the stories of hope that innovation in technology and telecom in particular hold in store for India. So just stepping back for a moment, it's useful to remind ourselves that we are sort of going through an unprecedented period of about half a century or so of very dramatic per capita GDP growth in the world. And a lot of this is actually being fueled by technology. Some full 50% of the current growth of world GDP per capita is estimated to be driven by some form of technology innovation, and roughly 3 times that value is represented by the value pools that are shifting because of disruptive technologies. So value pools shifting, let's say, from producer to consumer, or between countries as competitive advantage shifts, or between producers and companies who either have an edge or lose that edge in terms of their innovation. So from the perspective of really understanding what's happening in the world, it's quite important to think about how technologies are disrupting economies, economic flows, and life at large. This has been the subject of a piece of research that McKinsey Global Institute did. This was done out of our San Francisco hub last year, where the question really asked is, what are the top technology technologies that are really going to disrupt economies and disrupt the way people live and work over the period of, let's say, a decade. And of the 12 odd disruptive technologies identified by that study, this first family of 4, which we call IT and how we use it, and all of them, by the way, have telecom really as a backbone behind all these technologies, powering them in some shape or form. But this family of mobile internet, cloud technology, the Internet of Things, and the automation of knowledge work were individually and collectively the largest in terms of their potential disruptive impact by 2025, representing trillions of dollars of potential, either value added to consumers or value disrupted. We then asked ourselves what this meant for India, because it wasn't clear that the same list that was true and valid throughout the world would also be true for India. For example, this list has ideas like robotics, autonomous vehicles, and 3D printing. And the question was, if you did a similar top 12 or top 10 for India, what would these be? And we've started to think about that, and this is sort of emerging findings from research that we will publish later in the year. But as we started thinking about it, I think the 3 important things to keep in mind were, first, that India's context is what it is. We have very significant challenges and needs to address over the next decade. And as we think about what technologies can disrupt India, we have to keep our needs in mind. The second is we already have a proliferation of evidence, pilots, and examples from around the country which indicate that technology innovation and telecom innovation can transform service delivery. And third is, I think, a growing sense that we need to move faster to capture the potential of this innovation in service delivery. I don't need to belabor the point on India's needs for the next decade are huge. I mean, we have just framed this in terms of 3 big objectives: growth, inclusiveness, and governance. On any dimension, the magnitude of the challenge is quite large, and the need to accelerate our response to these challenges is equally large, given that, given we really owe it to our people, we really owe it to India's bottom half to address many of these issues in a very substantial way over the next 10 years or so. Now, it's also true that public spending on a whole range of basic services that, in a way, address these needs of growth, inclusiveness, and governance has also grown quite rapidly in the last 7 to 8 years. We estimate that about almost $120 billion of government spending goes towards meeting the basic needs of India's people. And that's around 6% of GDP. It's actually quite a sizable number. The challenge, however, as we all know, and as our research indicated, was that not all of this translates into benefits for people. As you think about all these basic services, we estimated that about 50% on an average of public spending actually translates into real benefits and real outcomes for people, whether it's in the form of subsidy that's delivered by way of cheaper food grains, whether it's in the form of learning outcomes that our public schools deliver to children, or whether it's in the form of health outcomes that our public health systems are delivering to people. On an average, just 50% is useful. The other 50% is either wasted, leaked, or ends up just not being effective enough to deliver what it's intended to deliver. So as you think about service delivery, in a way, this is a way of framing the problem. It's a large amount of money that's being spent. The needs are huge. How can you actually innovate to deliver this in a much more effective way? So coming back to what we think are our Indian top 10 technologies, and the ones on the left-hand side of the page, these 5, are again this family of what I like to think about as all the telecom-enabled technologies in a way. Ubiquitous connectivity, the Internet of Things, cloud, digital payments, and biometric identities. The last 2 did not appear on the global list, but given where we are, these are very important and significant technologies that we can scale up. And again, I don't have to preach to this audience, but it's very clear that if you think about the from-to of some of these technologies, certainly over a 10-year period, and possibly faster than that, we will see very dramatic increases in penetration and adoption that go with falling cost, and also that go with more open types of solutions that can be implemented in a variety of applications, devices, or operating systems, and thus reach a lot more people. If you look at what this can translate into for people, again, the numbers can be over a 10-year period staggering. This is where there is some element of maybe optimism in terms of saying that all of this is possible, but we do think that given the penetration rates and the evidence on the ground that many of these solutions are possible, it is going to be feasible to have fairly dramatic impact along many dimensions through technology-enabled innovation. Let me just talk very briefly about 3 small examples. With falling prices and growing reach of 3G and 4G and tablets, the whole notion of an SME which uses a sort of handheld system, a very simple system, which is a business-in-the-box type of system or solution, powered by cloud applications sitting behind it, and enabling that SME to access a whole range of services, whether they be frontline type services or improvements in its business processes. Now, lest this idea sounds far-fetched, I was just having this conversation yesterday with a very small retailer in Bombay who came to Bombay 10 years ago from a drought-stricken part of Kutch, very poor, set up a small 2-man retail shop to sell stationery. Just through the dint of his own enterprise, he's scaled up now to 3 branches and about 50 employees. And his question to me is, he can't speak English, but many of his employees sit on the computer and format little school projects for, children like my children and so on. So very smart guys. His question to me is, it would be great if I could have some kind of computer device to help me manage my inventory, because I procure from, these places that import stuff from China. I distribute across 3 stores, and I have a hell of a time tracking what's happening. It would be great, he said, if you didn't have to phone me up to order stuff, but could just log on and order stuff off my shop, and I would deliver it to you in the evening. So these are needs that are coming from very tiny stores with supposedly low sophistication, but the ability of technology to address this would dramatically raise his productivity. Another great example of something we see on the ground, this is a rural healthcare example from Tamil Nadu, and it's scaled up to 100,000 patients as we speak. Every element of this value chain is actually being done by them. The biggest challenge in rural healthcare is that we don't have trained people to do these jobs. We have a huge shortage of trained healthcare resources. What this NGO does is use technology and use some of these tablet-based devices to, first of all, take a 10th or 12th standard pass person from the rural community, train that person through very simple protocols, which are tech-enabled in terms of how to screen, evaluate, and assess a person for primary and preventive healthcare. This person then, who is now a healthcare worker because he or she is enabled with this, goes around door to door and geotags and creates a unique identity for each and every patient, barcoded identity. There are a set of very simple screening protocols. The system is hooked to the back end. Based on the answers which are plugged in, there is a prescription that's actually generated. And the entire system of providing the medication, doing the follow-up, calendaring when the person is taking or not taking medication and when the follow-up visit is required, is all enabled at the back end and powered, in a sense, by mobile internet and other technologies. So very powerful way of delivering low-cost healthcare and overcoming the problem of not having trained resources to do that. And finally, in education, I think most of us have seen many examples through the school system of how some of these innovative applications of technologies, whether it's biometric attendance of teachers or whether it's using hooking up to central systems that help you assess and evaluate students better, can free up time for teachers and really improve learning outcomes. There are, as I said, plenty of pilots across sectors and verticals which are already in evidence using many of these. And I think I want to conclude with potentially some questions We don't pretend to have the answers to this, but what will it take to really scale up these pilots is the question that's facing India today. And there are many suggestions here, how you can think about creating consumer demand and consumer pressure a lot more. So create the pull. Design applications very oriented to what end users want. Create accountable alliances that include government, some form of industry association or grouping, some form of NGOs, some form of communities. How can you think about constructive and accountable alliances? And then a host of ideas around how do you really break through silos and create a sense of outcomes. Because if all of this is happening even today, you can just imagine the power and potential if all the might of the government was really behind many of these solutions, helping us address the biggest challenges and needs that India has going forward. So I'll stop here and thank you, Mr. Ravi Shankar.
Thank you, Ms. Anu Madgavkar. I think it's been a good start to talk straight on 10 disruptive technologies. And top of the box is mobile internet, which in a way brings business in a box. I think succinctly put. Also, what I would like to pick from the presentation is GIGA, growth, inclusiveness, governance, and acceleration derived out of this whole thing. So I just thought, let me put this whole thing in the framework that inclusive growth was the important point brought out, that you need to have nourished people, you need to have educated people, you need to have skilled people. When that inclusive factor comes into play, then you automatically, your growth indices move up. And the governance is dependent upon the fact that there is an inclusive or inclusive growth. So I think the acceleration comes about it. And I think it's intertwined. And one major issue that has been brought out is social spending is not very well directed. Maybe 50% of it gets frittered away. So I think the concept of digital payments and the UID should better target it. So I think that's what the message, the impact of the innovations that India has brought out on this particular facet. The fact of how internet or the mobile internet ought to bring about a revolution, the telemedicine, e-learning, e-commerce, e-agriculture, etc., has been captured. So the impact is that we have the potential, but we need to get some of the basics in place. And that's the message that we get here. But she leaves us with the hope. Hope that things can be brought to fruition, and hope that there are quite a number of individuals who, despite language skills of what is known as the Anglo-centric world, have managed to be innovative. So I think we are not very far, so near yet so far, we are not very far, but we need to get our act in place. Thank you, Ms. Madgavkar, and I do hope that the audience have a lot of interesting questions to pose you to find out what has been the output of your research in jobs, pay and skills. So I think that would be interesting for all of us. I'd now like to request Mr. Anupam Khanna to make his presentation, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And I hope in the course of my presentation, I will be able to sort of give some sense of reality to the hope that Anu has been talking about. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And when Rajat invited me to speak and shared the agenda, I must say my first reaction was that perhaps I could do a more structured presentation on either of the first two sessions, because I did spend some time in infrastructure regulation and in telecoms proper. But then I very quickly realized that the third session was actually going to be the most exciting one. So I hope we can, I think Anu's presentation made a good start and I hope I can take it forward from there somewhat. The other thing is that in some senses, this is a story of convergence. Not convergence as the way people all talk about in general, about there are various dimensions there, but the convergence between ITES sector, the India's fabled, iconic IT industry, and some of the things we are talking about. Quite frankly, up to now, we have got a group of people who have been concerned mainly with telecom, and then there has been the IT and ES industry. Finally, they're coming together, and maybe I think I'll be able to show how. Just before I start, how many people know what SMAC is? Okay. Okay, I hope we'll learn a little bit more, I hope. I don't think I will tell you more about it, but just to let you know that NASCOM and IT-ITES industry is where NASCOM is the association of the IT-IT industry. We are often referred to as a lobby group, but we're not quite a lobby group because it has connotations which are slightly different than what we do. Just to give you one dimension of it, our membership includes both domestic firms and international firms. Anybody who's active in India and doing something, employing people, producing output, can join NASCOM as long as they're in this IT-ITES sector. The industry, as I said, is somewhat iconic, and this is more for an introduction because I thought most of the people here were probably from the telecom community, which has, quite frankly, been somewhat distant from the IT-ITES one. The sector is huge. People don't quite realize it. I didn't say this, but at a recent conference, one of the government representatives pointed out that this sector was keeping the country afloat. Just to give you a sense, this year our exports are of the order of, or foreign exchange earnings of the 86 billion, which is almost the top 2 merchandise exports combined. But this often doesn't figure into our current account discussions. People also know it is an industry which has put India on the map. It continues to be a dominant sector. I don't want to bore you with all the statistics, but in the global sourcing industry, outsourcing, what some of you might say, but actually there's a little more to it. We command almost more than 50% of the market share globally. The part I wanted to tell you is that actually the IT industry is not just BPO centers and the guys who keep the computers running, the IT people in the back office, but there are actually, we've recently sort of clustered ourselves into 5 lines of business. And one is IT services, the guys who keep the computers humming, the business process management, because it's more than BPO, just call center operations, but 2 new ones which have become more, people in the media have become more aware of, engineering R&D. It started off as engineering services, but India has become a destination of not just CAD/CAM services for the electronic sector, but across the board in lots of areas. This is a fast-growing area. We are involved in a lot of our members doing that. Then, of course, software products, which is both packaged software as well as a lot of other things, both for domestic use, but a lot of it is, of course, we do a lot of software development for everybody in the world. And lastly, the part that we are really going to focus on is the internet and e-commerce. And this is actually one of our, newest one. But perhaps it's probably the most exciting one. But before I go there, let me just also mention the IT industry. And you might say, what is he doing here? Because mobile, app economy, all the sorts of things that Anu was talking about, you don't think of the IT industry doing that. But actually, the IT industry is more than the 30 companies that most people hear about. Our own membership is all 1,500. And out of which I would say 1,400 are small enterprises, a lot of whom are doing all the sorts of things that are developing exactly the sorts of things that people are talking about. So this is not something in the future, it's happening today. And we'll hopefully get into some of this. Of course, our members are not there. There are 3 or 4 times as many people there. Some of them are small startups, are just 1 or 2 people doing things in there, very much in the sense that you might imagine old inventors. The other thing that I want to tell you, but maybe I'll come back to this, is that there's a huge amount, this industry is spreading all over, and a lot of this type of development, which